Picture this. Piers Morgan, stuck at home in Kensington after a nasty femur injury and a new hip, planted in an armchair with screens everywhere, news channels looping, scandals rolling in, and politics behaving exactly the way politics tend to behave when it smells blood. From that setup, Morgan offers a confidently grim prediction about Keir Starmer. In his words, Starmer is finished. Not bruised, not wobbling, but heading for the exit. What's interesting is that Morgan doesn't frame this as a single bad headline or a one-off Westminster embarrassment. He treats it as the beginning of a familiar political story, where a leader's problem isn't just what they did, but what the party and the public start to believe they represent. And in Morgan's telling, Starmer hasn't simply made mistakes. He's supposedly misread where the real foundations of British politics sit. Morgan's central accusation is dramatic, that Starmer has gone after what he calls the bedrock of British society. He bundles a whole set of symbols and power centers into that phrase. Establishment figures, big money, the monarchy, the moral language politicians use when they want to look clean while operating in dirty systems. The point he's making is less about policy detail and more about vibe. That Labour under Starmer is starting to look like the kind of elite machine it once promised a challenge. And that brings us to the figure Morgan keeps circling, Peter Mandelson. Morgan treats the latest controversy around Mandelson as something bigger than a standard political scandal. He even reaches for Profumo affair as a comparison, then insists this is worse, not because of salacious details, but because of proximity to power and wealth, and because it plays into the suspicion that the same influential people keep revolving through British public life, protected by networks that most voters can't access. In Morgan's description, Mandelson is talented, clever, connected, and repeatedly undermined by his own sense of entitlement. Whether you agree with that portrait or not, the role Mandelson plays in the story is clear, a symbol of the fixer culture, the person who makes things happen behind the curtains. And when a party that sells itself as morally serious is seen getting too close to that world, the damage isn't just reputational, it becomes existential. Because the heart of Morgan's argument isn't really Mandelson is bad, or even Starmer is compromise. It's about something more structural, how Labour destroys its leaders versus how the Conservatives do it. And that's where the analysis gets sharper. Morgan's claim is that Labour doesn't usually remove leaders quickly or pragmatically. Labour, historically, takes its time, agonises, and turns leadership failure into a moral drama. It's not just, is this leader winning? It becomes, does this leader still deserve to lead us? Legitimacy, in the deeper sense, is what gets put on trial in that model. A Labour leader can survive plenty of setbacks if the party still feels they stand for something bigger than themselves. Fairness, solidarity, a sense that Labour is there to represent ordinary people against concentrated power. Labour members, activists, unions, and MPs can hold their noses through disappointment if they still believe the leader is, at core, on the right side. But Morgan argues there's one shift Labour struggles to forgive, when a leader starts to look like they are serving power rather than challenging it. When the leader appears too comfortable with donors, insiders, unelected operators, and the kind of elite ecosystem that makes politics feel like a private club. In that moment, the emotional contract breaks. And once it breaks, Labour doesn't just move on. It tends to purge. Not like firing a manager, but like throwing out a heretic. Then Morgan flips the comparison. Conservatives, he says, treat leadership in a colder, more mechanical way. Not moral, but transactional. The test isn't, is this right? The test is, can this still work? If the leader can no longer win, can no longer stabilize the party, can no longer deliver, then it's over. Quick, ruthless, and relatively unsentimental. You can see that pattern in modern conservative history. Different leaders, different crises, but the same basic system. When things collapse, they cut the cord. Thatcher, Major, May, Johnson, Truss. Morgan points to the recurring rhythm. Leadership is a job. When the job isn't being done, or the public stops buying it, the party replaces the person doing it. Labour, by contrast, treats leadership like a calling. So when a leader falls, it feels like a betrayal of identity, not just a failure of competence. That difference matters because it changes the speed and the style of political death. Conservative leaders can be removed fast because the party is moving like a machine. Labour leaders can linger, until they don't. And when labor finally turns, it can turn brutally because it thinks it's defending its soul. Morgan also leans heavily on the idea of scandal fatigue, and the point at which voters stop caring about individual details and start caring about what the whole system is. He talks in the language of money trails, corruption, compromise, and elite cover-ups. You don't have to accept every implication there to recognize the underlying political truth he's aiming at. Voters can forgive a surprising amount, but they struggle to forgive the suspicion that the powerful are protecting the powerful. And then there's a line Morgan uses that's meant to land like a hammer. He says he refuses to believe that so many people around these scandals didn't know something. That isn't just an accusation about wrongdoing. It's an accusation about incuriosity, about willful blindness, about a governing class that looks the other way as long as the club stays intact. In politics, that kind of perception corrodes authority from the inside. Because if a leader is seen as indulgent toward bad actors, or too comfortable around them, or morally flexible when it matters, then the danger isn't only the opposition's attacks. The danger is internal erosion. Colleagues getting nervous, activists losing motivation, allies becoming liabilities. Morgan's wider point is that labor leaders often don't fall before they reach power. They tend to fall after, once the gap grows between what they promise to be and what they appear to have become. The party eventually looks at the leader and thinks, "You're no longer recognizable to the people we claim to speak for." From his armchair, watching the headlines keep coming, Morgan says he can already see the usual warning signs. Scandals spreading beyond the original story, relationships and allies turning toxic, and that intangible but crucial thing, moral authority, draining away. And when that goes, party discipline can only hold for so long, because discipline is not the same as belief. Now, to be clear, whether Starmer actually goes and how soon is still uncertain. Politics is messy and leaders do survive storms that look deadly at first glance. But Morgan's argument isn't really a prediction based on one news cycle. It's a theory of how labor works when it stops trusting its own leader. And the takeaway is uncomfortable for any labor leadership. Your survival depends on more than managing Parliament and the press. It depends on the party continuing to believe you are fundamentally different from the people and systems you said you were challenging. Once that belief collapses, the clock starts ticking. And if Morgan is right, the ticking has already begun.